So please, guys, come on the stage. NeoBanks versus banks.
Thank you. All right. Is this thing on?
Hello?
Hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. There we go. All right. So it's Chris and the two towers. So we have Jevgenijs. You guys probably know him recently as the guy who made Twino big, gated almost one of the largest peer-to-peer lending platforms in Europe. But before that, he worked at Estonian Bondora, and he also did a startup in New York City, which is interesting because I lived in New York. I live in New York City now. And then we have Andrius from Revolut. And what I found interesting about Andrius is he did business development for like 7 years at various different companies, and now you're country manager at Revolut.
It's one of those speeches.
Wow. So I have an opener for both of these guys. So let's start with Jevgenijs. Now you're currently head of consumer banking at Luminor. So Luminor was a kind of a merger of DNB and Danske Bank in the Baltics to compete with Swed and SEB. How'd you end up with that? Like, what happened?
Yeah, that's the first question I get to ask when I meet people this year, right? Because I started at Luminor only in the beginning of January. I think for me it was just a personal challenge, because it's not it doesn't happen often that a bank, a major bank in a region decides, hey, let's start from scratch. Let's rethink, rebuild everything, and build a modern bank. It doesn't even feel like a bank. It more feels like a startup, right? Let's start from the back, from scratch, from white page. And for me, it was an exciting challenge, and that's how I ended up in Luminor, and I'm really excited about that.
Cool. So.
It just reminds me of my wife, where maybe the real reason is just your wife telling, can you just get a normal job?
I'm glad I don't have that problem. So Andrius, business development for 7 years. So why did you become the country manager of
Where did you get that number?
I don't know. I was stalking you on LinkedIn.
No, it's more than 7 years. It's 10 years. So I basically started. My background is physics. So I studied physics, but I graduated in economics. So I started in physics, graduated in economics, and switched that, technical part into humans part, because I realized early enough that to speak with people, to solve businesses' problems and people's problems is the drive. So basically started as a salesman, like cold calling every day, and grew up into account manager, like hunter, farmer, then into business development, partnerships, changed a bunch of startups, and ended up at the best of them. Yeah, cool. And it's now head of country managers, managers of managers. We hate the word managers, but it's so much fun.
Okay, cool. So why are we here? I don't know. There's many different terminologies can be confusing. We have neobanks sometimes. We sometimes call them challenger banks. I know in UK for a while there was digital banks because I think banks didn't have really digital footprint. Do you think is this terminology needed? Is there a difference between kind of these tech-driven banks and the traditional banks? What's your thought on the terminology?
I mean, I think mobile network operators realize that early enough, in terms of people don't care about technology behind that, about licenses, about all of that thing which is behind the service. They just need the service, right? You really don't care as long as it's trusted in a way, right? As long as it performs the duties of sending money fast enough, of getting the best FX rate, withdrawing money for free everywhere in the world, of being able to pay with it, or get credit, or invest, or buy crypto or whatever. People really don't care. So if you ask people on the street whether do you use bank or neobank or challenger bank or some other thing, digital bank, so what's that? I just have a card in my pocket, or an app. So for us, and especially once we also applying for a banking license, right? So in that sense, so who are we now, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I always had this question, and why when people talk about fintech, they mean something other than bank, right? Because so there is no tech in a bank, or what's there, Because if you think, the bank nowadays cannot run without technology. Right? It's not about digital. The whole thing is a piece of software, right? And this is how you deliver the services. But I think the second aspect, which is important, is nowadays innovation can only come through application of technology, right? I think we've seen bankers and financial experts innovating using derivatives and so on that didn't play well, right? So I think the whole innovation can only come from technology, right? Whether it's a bank, neobank, fintech, whatever, right? It is a tech battle.
All right. Okay, so let's talk about the market a bit. I feel like this market is starting to get very competitive. Kind of one of my observations of this panel is Revolut is starting to have current accounts and looking more and more like a bank every day. TransferWise has cards now and starting to we're all kind of converging on offering all the services of banks. Do you think this market is overcrowded? What do you think? Do you think there are too many providers out there now for these services?
Which market? Pan-Baltics or global or?
Let's start with Baltics.
We don't do anything in the Baltics as such, right? Only word of mouth gets us into, in total more than 100,000 users now. People love it. People, once they get it, we haven't spent much on marketing. We haven't spent anything on marketing, on paid marketing, right? We don't do any Facebook ads or Google ads or nothing. We just go through word of mouth, growth. And this is the way to grow when your product is really adding value to the users. When your product is at least 10 times better, more convenient to use, more cheaper to use or free to use than anything else, then UX is really nice and smooth. Right? As I said, they don't care about technology behind. They just want the smooth services, the best rates, and that's it. The product will do the marketing for the people, for the brand.
Yeah. I think Andrius had a really good follow-up question. So which market, right? And the case of Luminor is that we are here to serve the Baltic countries, right? And I think that's very important. And because if you talk about innovation and fintech and neobanks, usually it's happening somewhere, in the US, in the UK, in Germany. But somehow, because we're a small market, for anyone, we are kind of left with what we have, as people of the Baltic states. And I think that this is just not fair, We're still 6 million, we're still, human beings, we deserve fair financial services. And I think that's probably a difference, when Andrius says, yeah, we don't do anything, for us, it is actually a market and we care,
Our mission in the Baltics is just to give alternatives to people, because people are sometimes are put in the corner. There's only 3 banks, like in Lithuania. We only have 4 or 5 banks, right? And people are like, I jump from one beer to another.
Exactly.
It's always there. Yeah. So we are educating people. There are alternatives out there, and I think especially fintechs entering this market, right? The more alternatives, the more options, the more educated options the user have, the better is for the user, and the competition will lower the prices, etc., etc.
Yeah. So let's talk about kind of banks' product offerings. Do you think there's any product offerings banks have right now that they have a very strong hold on that it's going to be tough for fintechs to kind of offer, or Revolut to offer?
Yeah, I think to answer this question, right, you probably have to start with the fact, or right, you have to admit that many standard bank products, right, or the products that actually drive a lot of revenue will disappear in whatever, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, right? I mean, paying, cards, accounts, a lot on issuing, acquiring, these services or this revenue stream will disappear, right? So essentially, it's an exciting time because everyone in the industry, whether it's a bank or fintech, they have to completely rethink, what will be their products when there'll be no money in payments and cards and current accounts and the typical, so to say, banking products, So where do you actually make money and how you build a sustainable business when these services are not profitable at all?
Sorry, I forgot the question. It's about oh, you asked the banks, right? So it's a question for banks or for us?
Maybe, I guess, where
it's I remember the question. So it was about which product, whether there is a product which has a competitive, only banks can hold on that product,
yeah.
Right? So for us, right, there is, we kind of debundling the bank. Look at where we can do, what products we can add, what value is essentially whether we can make. We introduced credit, for example, in the UK with our partners. And there, basically, it's the fastest credit on the market that you can get within 1 minute from application up to £25,000 paid into your Revolut card, right? So we're basically entering into that credit market and doing that much, how to say, in style, right? So I think the more and more we go in the future, the more and more there will be no products, right? Unless it's licensed, doing credit ourselves. Yeah. That's why we apply for the banking license, so we can issue, lend money ourselves. So it's really hard to hold on something nowadays.
I think banks or fintechs shouldn't limit themselves. You obviously have to rethink all the products, and one particular product that comes into my mind is mortgage, right? Because I mean, yes, peer-to-peer lending actually did a disruption, right? A disruption that is big enough for the banks to fill. But peer-to-peer lending model doesn't work with the 30 or 40-year mortgages, right? So mortgage is something that will have to probably be completely rethought if you want to change the way it works, right? Mm-hmm. And then, but then the second question is there a problem with mortgages? From the consumer standpoint, do you really actually need to change anything there? Mm-hmm. I mean, because the rates are pretty reasonable. The terms, convenience, it's there.
Yeah. Okay, let's flip it a little. So do you think banks in Baltics or in UK, I think UK has probably the most competitive kind of neobank landscape. Do you think they're starting to take notice? Do you think there's changes of how they're approaching UX, approaching their services to respond to the fintechs?
I think, coming from fintech side to bank side, and on the fintech side, you always assume that banks are not aware that the disruption is happening, but it's not the case. It is absolutely not the case. Banks understand, the disruption is happening, and they realize that some of the services there will be price pressure on some of the services, right? That we spoke about in daily banking needs and so on. That's obviously clear, and I think it would be unfair to assume that we're gonna build fintech or start a company in fintech space just because we think the bankers are stupid and don't realize the changes happening. It's definitely not the case.
I don't know. Definitely, banks are thinking about Revolut here in the Baltics, and I think we are a good source of inspiration for them, because some are not even changing the UI in here, just copying everything right away. So in that sense, they're definitely looking at us. In a sense of of the profits, etc. They still probably see that it's kind of a tiny thing. But I would like, there is this saying with cryptocurrencies, right? Especially with Bitcoin, right? This is, and compare Bitcoin to kind of regulated services like banks, etc. Everyone's laughing at Bitcoin, right? They say that first you laugh, then you ignore them, right? Then you fight them, and then you win, right? So it can really, in the end, those guys who you ignored, like Blockbuster, didn't pay attention to Netflix so much, and then Blockbuster is out, Netflix is in the market.
I think for also thinking of the consumers, right, or the people, it's it's not that the banks are not aware, right, but as Andrius said, someone has to come and challenge them, whether it's neobanks or challenger banks as Luminor, to actually make the change happen. Because if you're the largest bank in the Baltic states, why would you make any change? If no one is pressuring you, you get this attitude. We set the price because we can. So I think here it's this challenging. Whether it doesn't matter where it comes from, it's important to actually to start the change in the market.
Okay, so that leads me to another question. Do you think PSD2 is really going to level the playing field in this space in Europe?
I think PSD2 is really a wake-up call for banks, right? to improve their game, right? Because as a fintechs, if you're fintech with the best product out there, right, with the perfect user experience, with the perfect onboarding, with the low rates or no fees, then you have nothing to worry, basically, right? Banks would need to improve the game and potentially PSD, when looking at retrospectively in 5 years and 10 years, banks would, if banks survive,
coming from
banks would say, yeah, actually PSD2 was the action call for us.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think it's maybe not a wake-up call. The bankers weren't sleeping, right? They were aware, but they could control. And finally the regulator came in and said, finally you have to open up. And I think it will be a major change in some of the services. The only tricky part about PSD2 is it's about essentially the payments and the account information. And there is no business in payments anyways. Even now before PSD2, right? So I think it will create a start, right, for the innovation and kind of leveling up the field. But I don't think it will be the one that will change banking forever. So probably we'll have to wait for PSD3 or 4 or 5, for something major, to happen.
Nice. So just random question to the audience. Like, who here has used Monzo, Revolut, TransferWise, a financial service outside of a bank? Raise your hand. Okay, who here is using their entire finance life on a fintech? No one. Are we ever going to get there?
So that's first they laugh at you, right? Let's meet here in 1 year.
No, I think it's a very valid question, right? And I believe you get a lot, questions, but yes, people love it, but do they transfer the salary to you, right? And it's actually the thing for us, consumers love, our lending products, but perhaps, not all of them are home bankers for us, right? But there is, one element about this thing, it's actually trust. And yes, it sounds like a buzzword, something that you cannot measure or don't have like a blueprint how you actually build it. But trust is not about technology. Yes, you can build great UX experience, you can provide very competitive pricing, but there's very little to do with the trust. Yeah. And for people to start keeping all their money with you, you actually need this kind of human element, right? The trust, right? So you can have perfect solution, but if you don't have the trust, you cannot build the financial service provider.
And this is a very good point. And another thing is that it also varies across age groups. right? Because if the younger the user, the more trust surplus they have. They can give trust a bit, because otherwise, how would we explain so much investments in ICOs, right? Why do they do ICOs? How can you basically, trust this thing,
Trying to
right?
keep blockchain out, but
So
cool.
yeah, they have a lot of trust to spare
Very
to
cool.
different platforms, etc. Whereas older generation is really like, not willing to change that fast. And we've followed that trend very, very heavily with the younger generation, right?
Yeah.
They first top up 50 euros, then to 200, then you see that, they switch to receive the money into their Euro IBAN with us, and so on. So it's really interesting.
All right. So I think we're out of time. Are we going to have questions, or?
I think so.
Let's have some questions. I have a wonderful box here. So who wants to ask a question? No. There is a hand there. Stand up so I can throw it. Be ready to catch it. Are you ready? Are you ready? It comes. Yes. Excellent. Ask a question.
Is it working?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, hi, my name is Alex Paspechov. I'm from the company Iconic, working with the cryptocurrency and things like this. I'm in the cryptocurrency business. So my question is to the neobanks, to the Revolut mostly. Do you see everything that is making right now in crypto services like rivals, or you're gonna rock this party? And so also I would be happy if you could share your experience about regulators telling you about you should or should not using cryptocurrency and so on. Thanks.
I mean, yeah, that's probably the question for our legal team. So I would rather not speculate, because we can get. But in general, you cannot mess up with regulation, right? I mean, we all know what will happen if you mess up with regulation. So we have to follow that, and on the other side, we also have to educate them, right? Because regulator is not necessarily the smartest. I mean, yeah, the smartest man in the room, right? they also need, and the more open the regulation, the better it is for everyone, right? So we see those regulatory frameworks in Singapore, for example. Regulators are so open into kind of these innovations. They sit down with the businesses every day, et cetera, hear what's going on, so they can innovate in regulatory framework. So yeah, catch me after the talk. I'll tell you about.
Offline.
Maybe.
Anybody else? A question? Who wants to ask a question? There is a hand up first. Just throw the box to the next gentleman. Yes, there is a gentleman there. Just throw. Don't. Yes, good. Yeah.
Hello? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So the question is, you have very good product for the retail, but what about SMEs and even more about the corporate client who will need your product someday, hopefully?
Okay, so yeah, so we launched that's so interesting as well. So obviously we don't do any marketing on the Revolut for Business product, but we launched Revolut for Business product half a year ago, and we already have more than 20,000 companies using that.
Wow.
Obviously we're looking into introducing, credit for companies and insurances and anything else related to that, because in the end you want to build the ecosystem, right? You want to build B2C and B2B. Once you build the ecosystem, then you can collect money, for example. Merchants could collect money with 10 times smaller fees than they currently do, online merchants and eventually offline merchants. So yeah, it's the product out there. Just go there /business.
There was another question there. Can you just throw the ball?
Not for me, please.
Oh.
Okay, I'm Pavel Ivlev. I'm Russian American, and I have a question to Andrius, obviously, and you probably know what I'm gonna ask you. When?
In Russia?
No, in the United States. Russia is.
Russia is hopeless, but in the United States, when? Very good.
So United States?
Yes.
I mean, again, I'm not sure how much I can speculate on the date, but it will be the very soon. It's
very soon.
Safe answer.
It's this year, first half of the year. First half, not second.
Okay.
Excellent.
Can I do the final
Anybody else? Oh, you want to have a question?
Final question.
Okay, yes.
I'll do the final question. So, 2018, what's going to happen? What's your prediction? Growth, neobanks? Fall of neobanks?
Yeah, I would love to have holidays for the first time. But yeah, banking. I mean, for us or in general, for
in general, in the space.
In space, right? Yeah, Asia will be light years ahead in terms of fintech. Europe will, will do what they do now. Will do all those neobanks. Banks will sit down probably and still do nothing.
Still nothing.
So pass it on over to Jevgenijs.
Jevgenijs says no. Yes, we are doing something.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be just the usual picture, I think.
Yeah, I mean, for us, probably not a typical bank that can sit down and do nothing. Right? So, because, we are a merger of two banks, and as I said, we're starting from scratch. So we are very pragmatic about our stuff, instead of just saying that, yes, we're going to change the world, we're going to do practical stuff, right? So for 2018, we're going to launch the new digital bank for us, and as you can imagine, launching a digital bank is a big thing. It's not about the app. You have to build the whole infrastructure. But we're committed to that. I think it will set the standard on how quickly banks can actually rebuild their stuff. And that's the exciting part for us. And I think it'll be a beginning of a journey. Let's see where we take it from there.
Very cool.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for coming. Give them a big applause. This was definitely a blast.